Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Elevate podcast, the thought leadership platform designed for behavioral health executives navigating growth, innovation, and impact. Today, we're diving into a topic that sits at the core of this industry, but often goes unchallenged. Most programs are built to provide safety, structure, and immediate relief, but real recovery doesn't just happen within the facility. It happens when you're outside and in the real world. So the question becomes, are we adequately preparing patients for a life after treatment? Are we just managing them while they're in residential treatment? Joining us today is Bob Ferguson, a seasoned treatment executive and former founder of Jaywalker Lodge that brings 3 decades of experience in the field, including many years focused specifically on alumni engagement and aftercare programs. After drawing from over 2 decades building one of the most differentiated treatment models in the space, Bob explains why detox in residential is absolutely necessary, but usually not sufficient when it comes to sustaining long-term recovery. If you're a CEO, the founder, executive director, or behavioral health leader trying to improve outcomes while building a stronger and more differentiated program, this conversation is for you today. Hi, Bob. Welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great. It's great to have you here. I know of your experiences at several of the companies you work with. So having an opportunity to actually interview you and get some insight, perspective into how these successful and well-known programs has been established is just a privilege. So thanks again for sharing your wealth of knowledge today with all our listeners. Before we kick things off, perhaps you could give the audience like a brief overview of your experiences, your track record, who you are, what are you doing now?
Sure, thank you. I'm recently retired, and the screen just got large enough for me to see. My favorite thing to talk about these days is life in retirement, and people ask because you have all these friends and colleagues, and I like to tell them, it's awfully fun to have relationships and experience, but not have a dog in the fight. And I woke up this morning with this little cut on my forehead, and my wife said, "What happened to you?" Because she went to bed, and I woke up this morning with it. And I said, "I got in a wrestling match with Cody over a tennis ball. He's our little French bulldog." And she said, "It looks like you have a dog in the fight now." So she was giving me a little grief. But no, that's where things are at now. I loved your introduction. I think we got to chat briefly to prepare for this conversation. And I am a guy who got sober when I was 30 years old after multiple failed attempts at recovery. But I was in 3 rehabs before I finally got sober. And the third one wasn't any better than the first 2. It's just that how I behaved there and after I left it were different. They had a longer term focus, and it helped me get well because I was good at treatment and bad at recovery. I loved and thrived in the structure of a contained 30-day setting. I'd leave refreshed with my eyes wide open and a commitment to my sobriety. But unfortunately, my sobriety didn't travel well back to my hometown. I'm a New Yorker. I was a journalist. I jumped back into the game. I'd become distracted by people, places, and things. I'd slowly take over my will and stop following the suggestions of others. And boom, I'd be back in the soup again. So when I opened Jaywalker Lodge in Colorado 21 years ago, it was very much a program designed for that guy that I used to be. And Jaywalker is a sort of term of trade in our field that refers to the stubborn, relapsing alcoholic, the recidivist. And so we attracted clients who were like me in their mid to late 20s, men only, and we required them to stay for a minimum of 4 months, average length of stay over 6 months. And many of them stuck around in the local community afterwards, which I hadn't planned for or expected, but it resulted in our learning so much from these newly sober alumni who were hanging around the men in treatment all the time. And what we realized almost immediately is that these guys with a year or 9 months of sobriety hanging out with our clients was what worked the best, because they were living, breathing models of what the clients were trying to achieve for themselves. They were having daily interactions with these newly sober alumni. And even though they weren't licensed counselors or clinically trained, they had enormous street credibility. They'd been where our clients had been, but they knew something about the solution. And so completely by accident, there was this alchemy of interaction and community integration in our program that we recognized almost immediately. And so that sort of brings us to today, where, much of what you outlined in your introduction was just really well said. I believe that primary care treatment, whether it's outpatient or residential, is indispensable. It's absolutely necessary, but arresting active addiction in a contained setting is not the same thing as initiating life and recovery in community. So that balance is something that I like to talk with people about, and I get asked about it a lot because we were very heavily integrated in the community setting at Jaywalker. And much of what we did was available to every treatment center. It's low cost. The clients love it, but it does involve taking a different mindset as an operator on risk management. And it doesn't always fit with our payer models in terms of reimbursements for insurance. So it's a little bit of a leap for providers to take the locks off the doors and the bars off the windows and just trust that their patients are going to be okay out there in the surrounding community, integrated and acting like a part of the community with other sober members of that community.
Fantastic. My very first reaction is just bravo. First and foremost, for you, identifying what was important for your sustained sobriety, but as a business owner, as a marketer, my entire life, I think when you identify a problem and you're able to solve it, but at the same time can package that up, genuinely believe in it, and then cater to the very audience that resonates with that, because you use yourself as the guinea pig prototype as for refining that always translates into success, especially if it is aligned with purpose and passion. So congrats first and foremost on that. There's a lot to unpack from your introduction and your 30 years in the field, also prior to Jaywalker. I know you touched on several different positions. I would just like to comment on what you mentioned, that the risk management, the current state of the union in terms of facilities, like why are they, when we're looking at this contained environment, and yes, it's the 30-day stay, and this is what the biller is you're pre-approved for, and that's what's part of the eligibility check that you have in place. But what is the concern for facility within, and how did you tackle that differently to make folks go into the community next, as you put it?
It was, if I'm being honest, it was a complete accident. And we've spent the better part of the last 20 years marketing and positioning and branding Jaywalker Lodge, and also a second program separate from that we opened up in Austin, Texas, called Alpha 180. And both of these, we would proudly tell anybody willing to listen that we were an open community model, that the people don't actually get sober in rehabs, they get sober in community, and our guys are in the community. But the way it actually began, it was the opposite of that for me. And what I mean by that is, when we began to look for a location to open Jaywalker, I had imagined a 30, 40 acre ranch in the foothills of Western Colorado, outside of Aspen, with mountain views, in a safe, secluded setting, far away from the neighbors, and having maybe 8 or 10 beds. And that we would really have kind of a structured, contained timeout from your life and really get into the work of trauma resolution, root cause, family of origin, and it would be a quiet sanctuary. And we tried for a year and a half to we had 3 properties under contract in this area outside of Carbondale called Missouri Heights. And each time we would find a more remote location, and we were defeated in zoning. So I ended up with the last one of those 3 with a huge public hearing in Garfield County Board of Commissioners, And there were 100 people at this public hearing, and half of them were from the recovery community saying this is exactly what we need here. And the other half were neighbors and property owners waving lawsuits saying to the county commissioners, this will destroy the character of our rural community. The whole not in my backyard, NIMBY thing. And we were defeated by the county commissioners. They voted us down 2-1. And my attorney at the time said, listen, you've been discriminated against. You now officially are on record with a lawsuit you can win. Fair housing, Americans with disabilities, the attorneys for the county all came out on your side, but the commissioners made a political decision. And you can open your facility, and if the county tries to stop you, you can sue them. And that sounded just awful to me. I thought about what would it be like to be in a treatment center where every neighbor is glaring at your, passenger vehicle as it goes by, and nobody's welcome. And my attorney said, or if you don't want to open up in this environment of hostility, you can try to get a use by right in a commercial zone district in one of the two towns, Glenwood Springs or Carbondale, where you have a permitted use. And it was a real moment for me because my first response was like, I don't want to open up my beautiful bucolic men's treatment center next to some Napa Auto Parts. This isn't my vision of what my treatment center is going to look like. But we started to look around, and we found a building in town that we were able to build out and convert. And the model in that moment moved from the mountaintop down to Main Street. And I talked with my clinical director, a man named Don Gargaro, and I said, do you think we can do this? Do you think we can actually have safety and keep guys from relapsing and using right there on Main Street in a little mountain town? And he said, I don't know. And so he did a little work and research, and we opened up, and we had open houses. We invited the neighbors in. I gave everyone my cell phone number and said, if you have any problems with my men, call me directly. We wouldn't allow our guys to go out in groups of more than 3. We didn't want them being seen as a group of, we had all these good neighbor policies. We volunteered every chance we got in the community. At the local animal shelter, the guys would volunteer. Habitat for Humanity, Adopt a Highway. We were the first ones there to set up a church picnic. And we were doing it because it was public relations. It was the marketer in me. It wasn't a clinical strategy. But what we saw was that if you take the bars off the windows and the locks off the doors and you disable the security cameras and just say to the guys, look, you have a choice every day to walk in that bar or past that bar, in that marijuana dispensary or past it, in that liquor store or past it. Don't go out there alone. We need you to be with another guy. If you choose to use, you can't stay in our community. But if you choose to stay in our community, every day you'll put your head on the pillow with a little more agency and a little more ownership of your own recovery. And so we gradually increased their access to the community and their rights. So they were on house arrest for the first 2 weeks, but then we let them go out and visit with their sponsors in AA. We would have them go to outside AA meetings and meet for coffee with other recovering people at the coffee shops. Much to my surprise, the container became the relationship among the peer group. The not wanting to get kicked out, not wanting to be on the outside looking in was more effective than barbed wire, security cameras, locks on the doors and bars on the windows. It surprised me, and it was never by design, but this was our accidental happy discovery, was that these guys were tired of screwing up. They just wanted a chance to do it right. And it turned out to be just this unfolding discovery over time, with guys showing up as a better version of themselves in a group than we had ever seen them do individually.
That's fascinating, and a really a unique approach, not what I come across most common when I'm talking with facilities and the treatment programs. And the first thing that comes to mind is because of this very unconventional to some extent. It worked out. Obviously, the track record speaks for itself, and I think we'll dive more into all the added benefits from a marketing standpoint, from Alumni, from organic growth that resulted in. But in the beginning, was there some learnings that maybe if anybody's thinking about how do I go from containment to a community and model this, some learnings that you can share? Were there increased AMA rates in the beginning or a higher relapse when you took this approach to it? And how, did you adjust it after some learnings? And what was those learnings?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I talk with younger guys a lot, because there's some wonderful young entrepreneurs in our space, and many of them themselves are in recovery. Many are not, but the energy and passion of guys getting going, it is so helpful and so important. And I tell them when they talk to the old guys like us, find out the mistakes, find out what didn't go well, because you can avoid the mistakes we made. And the last story was about a mistake. We were just avoiding a lawsuit. We didn't want to get into it with our neighbors, and so we pivoted. There were a couple of things that early on that were really learnings. The one that comes to mind, one thing we have always done, when we opened, we were 120-day minimum length of stay. And our design was in the first 2 months, that's a 4-month length of stay. In the first 2 months, we would focus on treatment. And then the second 2 months, we would focus on transition. So if you were meeting the criteria and hitting the markers, you would be given permission after about 60 days to go look for a part-time job in the community. And we would give you, and another thing that I didn't mention is that all the technology with our clients is taken away for the first phase of treatment. Today, our first phase is 90 days and our second phase is 90 days. But back then it was 60 days and 60 days. So what we had done, and the learning was, we were getting incredible positive results from taking guys' cell phones and laptops away for 60 days. They would learn what it is to talk to each other. It's often said that, especially true with men, that women connect face to face and men connect shoulder to shoulder. We're either doing something shoulder to shoulder, we're playing sports, we're watching sports, we're going somewhere, but we never get together as men to just talk. And that was one of the beautiful things we discovered. When you remove the technology and there's 24 hours in a day and you keep them busy, they get engaged, and men learn slowly over time without technology how to talk to one another. And that's great. So we would get this incredibly close, well-connected peer group that looked out for each other and that held each other accountable. And then after 60 days, Charlie would go get a part-time job at the golf course, and he'd get his phone. And there was this subtle disconnection. So we had this subgroup of senior peers with 60 to 120 days sober who had a different life. They were interacting in the real world. They were making a paycheck. They had their phones and their technology. And yet those guys were so important to the guy with only 6 days. You needed them to be talking to each other at dinner, and they started to segregate. So one of the great learnings that we had right away was, if you're going to have 2 levels of care in our community with such radically different day-to-day experiences, you needed to have them in different buildings with different counselors. And you actually needed to, because if you didn't, what's the best way to put it? The milieu would disintegrate. And you don't want a disintegrated milieu. You don't want disconnection. The most important guy, we called it the incredible disappearing senior peer. Those senior peers started to clique up and disconnect from the new guys, and they need to. So our pivot, our response on that was to open a second building, make the first phase 90 days, and then put the 2 populations separate, so that you had senior peers and new guys connected all the way through a 90-day experience. Then they'd get their phone back. then they'd get their job and they'd be with a group of people living the same way. So we stumbled through this for sure in the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, that makes sense. And it also sounds like one of those incidents when you say you can only connect the dots looking backwards. It's like, it sounds obvious when you explain it. That makes perfect sense. I think I would second that vote if that was a recommendation. And also, I think to your other point, in terms of the concerns about safety and risk, you're talking about a group who's been in the program. They build some robust, healthy habits. They have a sponsor. They're following the program. That house can be allowed to do certain activities that the first house is not privileged to yet. That makes complete sense to me. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, because I know you built Jaywalker with the whole alumni engagement and community building as like the primary stakeholder. And you're essentially looking at it like, we are supporting our clients, our patients, our friends, and get into society again, get back into taking on a job, getting integrated into a day-to-day life. How did you enable these folks from an alumni standpoint? Was there certain strategies that you saw that worked particularly well in your case?
Yes, thank you for asking that. And we'll circle back too, because I know we have a marketing background in common, and marketing a program where your minimum length of stay is 120 days, where you're taking the technology away for
That's
months.
That's a tough one, eh?
Where you're deeply
try
rooted
to put that in a line. Oh, sorry.
So we can get back to that, and there were definite learnings about that one too. The alumni piece was always important to me. My background is that by the time my parents were willing to support me going to my third treatment, it was a one-way plane ticket. I was living in New York and they said, listen, we are no longer interested in Bobby's ideas about Bobby's aftercare. You're going to go to Minnesota to a place called Hazelden, and you're going to do what they say. And if you don't, good luck. But we're going to support you in this treatment experience and buy your plane ticket. But whatever they say, do what they say. And for once, I ended up, Hazelden had its 30-day program, but after that, they referred me into a 4-month extended care unit for chronic relapsers. At the time, it was called the Jelnik unit. And there were 29 of us on the unit. And we were the lost causes. We were the people that needed an additional 4 months just to focus primarily on step 1. And that was their model. And following that, they referred me into what they called a halfway house, which today we call sober living in St. Paul. And so by the time I was discharged, I'd been in Minnesota in the Hazelden continuum of care for 9 months. And I had this opportunity to go back to New York, one of my former employers and all this stuff. And something changed. I was talking with a group of alumni who themselves had gotten one-way plane tickets from around the country to come to Hazelden. They were living and thriving in the St. Paul community. All of us had get well jobs. I was working in a warehouse, never been happier. I'd made a host of friends. I played recreational softball and went to meetings every night and hung out. And I just had the simplest life. And for the first time ever, I listened to what I was told. And it was a group of my peers and other alumni that said, there's nothing good for you waiting back in New York City, Bobby. Just stay. And I did. And so alumni were a huge part. I was part of the alumni community. And shortly after that, I was hired to be the alumni coordinator at Hazelden. And I ended up working in that job for 7 years at Hazelden. So everything that I learned about residential treatment, I learned in an organization with 1,100 employees, 55,000 alumni, and I learned it through the lens of alumni in recovery. So all of my worldviews on treatment got skewed towards what's it like for the newcomer in early recovery after treatment. What are the promises? What are the pitfalls? What are the triumphs? Where do you get tripped up? And so alumni had always been at the center of the bullseye as we unfolded and began to launch Jaywalker. One of the things there are a lot of great programs around the country doing great things with their alumni. I met a girl named Velvet Mangum in Orange County, California, who had a program for women called Safe Harbor. And every Wednesday night, she would invite all of her alumni into Safe Harbor to have a meeting and have dinner with her clients. So as soon as we opened Jaywalker, we had the Wednesday night alumni dinner, and that started to grow. We had on Friday nights, we had a 12-step speaker meeting open to the community, which Hazelden had always done in St. Paul. So what we did from the beginning was sort of select the greatest hits of other programs and other operators who were doing things that basically unapologetically and enthusiastically welcomed alumni back into their building to have them interact on purpose as much as possible with their clients in treatment. And the key that we learned was just get out of their way. We started that Wednesday night. They would come at 5:30. They would have dinner with our men, and then they would go into the library, which is a big group space, and we'd have a counselor go in there and facilitate a sort of a check-in group. One day, the alumni asked if we really needed a counselor in there, that they might feel safer and more intimate and be more honest and transparent if they didn't, they trusted the counselors, but they didn't want to, they threw our counselor out of the room, and we listened. And so for 20 years now, the alumni do self-directed meetings at Jaywalker. They use our space and they hold each other accountable. So there were some things that we learned along the way, but as a general principle, I think the opportunity that all of us have as providers is two things: take down any partitions, real or cultural, that separate our clients in treatment from our alumni in recovery. Those guys are solid gold. They are living proof that your programs, and they have ridiculous credibility. And so for those clients like me with this sort of oppositional defiance, I had problems taking advice, suggestions, or directions from any authority figure in my life, from my dad, from a teacher, from a landlord, from a boss, from a coach. But I could listen to another guy and just find ways to connect those guys. Soon, it wasn't long after that we had alumni would drive our Sprinter buses to the local AA meetings and back, not staff. Alumni would help lead we would have staff-led expeditions. Every month or so, we'd take our men out into the wilderness for these 3-night, 4-day mountain-based expeditions in the backcountry. We always had alumni on those trips, and they were just volunteers. So the volunteer program just flourished out of. It's a way for alumni to stay connected. You have tremendous currency and traction in terms of real active demonstration of recovery capital exhibited and on display with your alumni who are working in their jobs. They've got girlfriends, they're managing finance, romance, and all the pitfalls of early recovery. And so just trusting that your alumni will do right by your guys, and your guys might bring stuff forward to them they may not be willing to share with an authority figure. That was really important.
Oh, that's really remarkable to hear. And I can only imagine because it's so purpose-driven, people want to give back. Once many folks can resonate this, once you've gone through recovery, you just want to help somebody else who's struggling. So the effort, the energy, the support on whichever task it is, from these alumni events to the community engagement, are just probably amplified to a whole different level because of that, the self-driven vehicle that it evolved into, right?
Yeah, they're embodiments of the future promises of your own recovery. And you're just wandering down the delicatessen for a sandwich, and the guy at the register was in your bed at Jaywalker a year ago. You go to the golf course and the guy parking your cart is a former Jaywalker guy. You just keep running into them at Ace Hardware and Whole Foods and all around. And the accidental incremental benefit of that is you are seeing a sneak preview of what your future could look like in sobriety. And it's a show me, don't tell me thing. And I'm grateful the alumni stuck around, but I'm even more grateful that they were willing to come alongside and volunteer and get engaged with our guys.
Phenomenal. I absolutely love it. Let me ask you, because many facilities that I get in contact with on a daily basis, for various reasons, they may have a census problem. They have a hard time acquiring patients, maybe get them to stay, maybe to fostering alumni as a result of that. And there's typically what you started out by saying is we required people to, it's essentially a 60-day times 2 stay. Now it's 6 months for a total program. By the way, we're going to take away your cell phone and you can't use your laptop. As a marketer, I think I would be cringing about building a landing page for your campaign in terms of putting all those efforts in. That would be probably a detractor for many. So at the same time, I think it's really powerful because based on your experiences, how it grew organically at such a level. Did the trade-offs are first and foremost say, this is the program type we have, we believe in it, and we stand by it, and then at the same time, engaging all the alumni, was that the main driver of growing patient acquisitions and then offsetting basically that concern of we can't really run conventional marketing tactics because of these strong disclaimers or requirements?
Yeah, it was a huge challenge right from the outset. And I'll say after I left Hazelden, I went and I was a regional marketer for Promises Treatment Center in Malibu, which is a wonderful program. They were in West LA as well. I did that for a couple of years. And I also was the US marketing rep for Eric Clapton opened a treatment center in Antigua in 2000 called Crossroads. And those two marketing experiences put me out into the arena. I got to go to conferences. I got to meet other providers. I got to visit other treatment centers. I got to talk to a host of professional referrents. If you're working in a residential primary care program, you might call on outpatient providers whose clients are struggling and need residential. You might call on a therapist, a psychiatrist, an emergency room doctor. So it gave me a look at, and what I came away from after those two experiences was not so much a business plan, but a sort of a list of personal preferences and pet peeves. Why is it that 90% of the treatment programs in this country are rooted in the Minnesota model or 12-step recovery, but not a single website will mention that? And it's because people don't like that. They recoil sometimes from this idea of it sounds religious, it sounds like a cult, whatever it is, it's not a popular idea. And I wanted to open with this loud, proud embrace of we're deeply rooted in the 12 steps and we make no apologies for what you need to know and all these things. At the end of the day, I remember going on this tour and Don Gargaro, who was my first executive director and our clinical director when we opened, he and I went to 6 states in 8 weeks in the 90-day run-up to our opening Jaywalker. And I had 2 thoughts in mind when we opened. One was the one that we talked about earlier. I was in no position to open an eating disorder clinic for 14-year-old girls because there was an unmet market need based on a focus group in Peoria that this is what the market. I knew one thing, and that was Jaywalkers. I was one. I wanted you to understand, first of all, what a Jaywalker was, and secondly, why we were set up for that client. I was also a lazy marketer. So if you have a program, we had 16 beds when we opened, and your length of stay is 4 months. That means that you have a maximum capacity of 48 admissions over the course of an entire year. So yes, it's hard to get a guy to commit to 120 days of treatment, but it's also hard to get him to commit to 30 days of treatment. So since
true.
you're in for a dime, you're in for a dollar. The hardest thing is just getting them to say yes. It's less important what they're saying yes to. And I thought, okay, if I can turn my beds 3 times a year instead of 12 times a year or less, or even more than that. So there it is. That's crass. That's not altruistic. That's just the easier, softer way, if you will. And I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek, but the most important thing, and I think it's important to not call anybody out. We were in a unique position to be a specialty program for a very integrated vertical client profile. If your guy has been to 3 to 5 previous treatments, if your guy does well in rehab and badly afterwards, if your guy's family is willing to send him to treatment again and understands that this is a time-consuming and expensive process. So you've self-selected yourself into this very narrow vertical. And we were never, I think the important frame for marketing for us was, it was never a direct-to-consumer value proposition. The Jaywalker himself was our client. It was his family who was our customer, right? That is so important. So when your customer and your client are 2 different people, when the person getting the services is not the same as the person that's paying for them, that informs your messaging and your marketing. The other thing that we were, again, the lazy marketer, Bobby, I wanted to have a business-to-business proposition. So we were not marketing to Jaywalkers. We were marketing to counselors at primary care treatment centers that were tired of seeing Charlie show up on their caseload over and over again. So we focused on the client profile. I had a philosophy that said, nobody wants to hear about your dialectical behavioral therapy expert and your mindfulness consciousness training at 9:30 in the morning. I would train our marketers to be really clear on who our guy was. If your guy looks this way and has these characteristics, he might be a Jaywalker. And if he is, this is what we provide for that specific client. The problem was, I was very worried that we would get counselors that were enthusiastic, parents that were enthusiastic, and guys that just did not want to be there. So we required a 1-hour pre-admissions interview for every client. And it was not an interrogation. It was like full disclosure about what you can expect. And the lesson we learned, and I don't know that this is applicable for everyone, but we developed this marketing principle called the principle of contrary attraction. If you tell an addict what he needs to do, or if you try to entice him into what he gets to do, you're likely to end up with either defiance or entitlement, coddling, and pampering. What we did was say, look, this is the hardest thing you're ever going to do. Many are called, few are chosen. You might be a Jaywalker. We're going to need you to pass we had a fitness test. You need to be able to hike for 3 miles with a 30-pound pack. We gave them like 6 or 7 reasons why they didn't want to come. And then offered but we have programs that won't make you do these things. It'll be the greatest experience of your life, but if you're not ready, there's some other programs that are a lot easier and a lot softer, and you won't have to deal. We won't. And it's just this thing. These guys were like, no, I can't do that. And so and it got them fired up before they came. And then when they got there were all these peers saying, oh yeah, man, that first couple of weeks is rough, but you're going to be fine. And so immediately the alumni and the peer would wrap them up. But yeah, that was another learning was.
Wow. I know you refer to yourself as Bob, the lazy marketer. And I just want to say, I think you're Bob, the brilliant marketer. Everything from defining your ideal patient profile to the T and standing to, and then understanding who do we need to market to and who are the people that can identify the best possible. then getting them there, not trying to sell them, but on the contrary, trying to position them as why this is maybe not a good fit, and we don't know if you qualify. Maybe you should take another option that's easier. Just speaking to that personality that you already have, you understand the persona. It's just brilliant. That's phenomenal. I think that part of your success, I'm just seeing it goes through all these different stories you're telling, is that you've been so consistent with who you're targeting, how we're going to help them. You're not going to deviate from it. And at the end of the day, having second to none outcomes, and then an alumni group that it was ever growing, that could then be your advocates and support it and endorse and be part of that continued engagement. I think no surprise why you've been successful with your program over the years. It's just brilliant.
And Gary, I think sometimes we don't trust our gut enough. As in marketing, our brain tells us we want to widen the funnel as much as possible. We want to be all things to all people, and we end up really not differentiating ourselves until we limit our scope. Every program has been put on this planet with a very specific purpose, and my experience is that the more specific you can be.
Yes,
it's counterintuitive, but send us anybody, we'll do well with them. Doesn't really separate you from what they're hearing from all the other programs. The other thing is that drug addicts and alcoholics are pretty resilient and pretty gamey and pretty well resourced for survival. And what I mean by that is they have very sensitive bullshit detectors. And it's important, I think, that they feel like they're talking to somebody that's telling them what they need to know, even if it's not what they want to hear, because they are not filled with hope. They're reading the room. They're scanning you for, their bullshit detectors are that's how they've survived. That's how we get through to make it to even alive to go to treatment. And so sometimes just laying it out straight seems like you could put people off, seems like you could scare people off. But my experience is, especially with addicts and their families who've been through the ringer, just laying into the truth and leaning in and saying, you're trying to change your life, man. You didn't get here overnight, and you're not going to get out of this hole overnight. You've tried to think your way into new behavior with different strategies as a family and as an addict, and it's landed here. Now we're going to take the time that it takes to act our way into new thinking, because thinking our way into new behavior hasn't worked. And it takes time. It's just not a quick process. And that's not what anybody wants to hear, but it is what they need to know. And I think it's refreshing sometimes when we can bring that message with no apologies, just straight up. This is hard. This is a hard deal. And it's not going to be wrapped up and put in your suitcase after 21 days.
I think this is we shared some golden nuggets today. I think I speak with so many facility owners, a lot also that are maybe new to the industry and are opening up, and they haven't have all these different aspects clearly defined. And clearly defining it makes you speak with all the bullshit detectors. They can't read them. It has a certain magnetism, also from a marketing standpoint, that you're very clear on what you can or you cannot do. You're adamant about what you tolerate, and here's the conditions. And that is, I think, for many who are vulnerable and who are one of the worst stages of their life, and they may be upholding a facade, but this is the kind of confidence and you want to learn in a program. And the only way that can be conveyed, I think, authentically, is when you truly believe it, and it falls across the entire organization, from the admissions intake coordinator to the alumni coordinator. Then it's really powerful. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, Bob. It's truly remarkable to hear from those experiences. And then if we had more time, I think I would pick your brain for the next 2 hours, but maybe we do a round two. I want to ask you one closing question, because you've been 3 decades in the industry. You built this amazing program. You exited 2 facilities. And I know right now, you mentioned to me earlier that you don't have any commercial interest. You're just taking a leave and pondering on, like, how can you take all these experience and learnings? What's the next thing for you. With all that said, and given your position, you've been able to reflect a little bit on this journey you've been on for the last 30 years. If you had a magic wand and you could say, Gary, here's the things that we have to change in the industry, the single most important thing based on my 30 years of experience and this, what would that be that you would tell to our audience now?
Thank you. By the way, thanks for giving your audience and this field this space to talk. I've yet to meet one person in those 30 years that got out of bed in the morning and didn't want to make things better. So one thing I'm really cautious about is Jaywalker Lodge was outside of Aspen, Colorado. It was high end. We worked with some private insurance, but it was expensive. And so we were able to build and engineer a model of care for a specific client that helped maybe the 1%. So nothing's worse than having some arrogant dude get on his high horse and wave his finger at people saying, you just need to do this and you just need to do that. We looked at our access to care. It was terrible because we weren't working with these insurance plans. We didn't help people like the working guy. So I just think that one thing that we all need to do is operate within the realistic constraints of who we are and what we do and not kid ourselves about anything like that. So the people that are in this field are resourced, they're motivated, there are some frustrations, there are programs with good people working in them whose clinical care models have been reverse engineered from a reimbursable diagnosis. Let's begin with what insurance will pay for and work backwards from there. What I would do is just invite creativity and collaboration. Talk to your competitors. Go visit other programs. It's amazing. When I started in this field, just like when I started in recovery, I was a newcomer and people embraced me. I'd worked at Hazelden for 6 years, and Hazelden was this granddaddy on the hill of the old established Minnesota model treatment programs. And I was arrogant douchebag. I thought I knew it all because I'd worked at Hazel. And people still put up with my bullshit and taught me and invited me in. And when I went to my first conference, they showed me how to set up my booth. We are not selling industrial ball bearings or rubber products. This isn't Acme Industrial. Take advantage of the culture in this field where people still are willing to put the collaboration forward and competition aside. Great people doing great things. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, because I don't know. Don't be afraid to say I was wrong, because God knows we're wrong. And will you help me? And I think those are the principles we are trying to teach clients to put into practice in their lives. Ask for help, turn outside yourself, trust your peers. If we did that as professionals, trusted our peers, asked for help, were transparent, and invited people into our programs and went and visited theirs, every time I went to see another program, I left with just energized with great ideas. And anytime somebody came into mine, I felt like it was you and me against the problem and not you against me. The doors are open. We just knock on them and go through them. And I just hope that we never forget that as hard as it is to fill a census, to meet our admissions requirements, the shitty things somebody might be saying about our program behind our back, lay it aside. Remember that together we can do it. And it sounds corny, but I've never been turned away when I've turned to another colleague or professional or program in this space and said, I'm stuck. What are you guys doing? Can you help me with this? And that's not like any other industry. It's really not. It's pretty unique. So that would be it.
Fantastic. Great encouragement. And I agree. I think that if we can't practice what we preach, to your point, and we're encouraging patients, clients to do the same, magic typically happens when you open up in that case. And that's why I love to go to different conferences and meet with people. And even if we're not working together, I just pick your brain and you pick mine. And I'm learning something every day. And God, Lord knows that I learned a lot today. So Bob, thank you so much for this interview. If any of our listeners would like to get a hold of you and ask you some questions or can inquire different opportunities, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, straight up, my email is at jaywalkerlodge.com. I'm still the founder emeritus, which just means I play golf and offer stories and advice to people that don't want it. And it's very fun. And then my phone number is 970-379-8810. When you're on the sidelines and not in the game anymore, nothing's more fun than talking to people who are. So I'm always glad when I get those calls. Yeah.
Amen. Bob, I want to be you when I grow up. Let me end it with saying by that. Congrats and thanks again for an amazing interview.
Gary, thank you. And thanks to Elevate. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into the Elevate podcast. If you liked the content you heard today, make sure to subscribe to the channel and share this episode with somebody who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next show.